On behalf of Korn Ferry Future Step, I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Valery Yakubovich, whose presentation focuses on HR management in the gig economy. Valery is an associate professor of management at ESSEC Business School, an international higher education institution. He is also a senior fellow at the Wharton Center for Human Resources. His research revolves around talent management, innovation, and organizational behavior. His findings have been published in leading journals such as Organization Science, Harvard Business Review, and American Sociological Review. They have also been included in numerous edited volumes. Valery's current projects explore new forms of employment relationships in the context of digital transformation, algorithmic data-driven management, innovative, non-hierarchical forms of organizing business activities, and the role of language in the transfer of innovative management practices. In addition to his academic work, he advises businesses and nonprofit organizations on management innovations. In his talk today, Valery will explore the ongoing revolution in information and telecommunication technologies that has allowed companies to replace their permanent workforce with on-demand workers on a scale like we have never seen before. However, the experience of businesses in the gig economy tells us that, to be successful, such a transition requires innovative management practices that offer workers the possibility of flexible but long-term relationships amid the high uncertainty of spot labor markets. Welcome, Valery.
Thank you. Good morning. So I continue Peter's line of presenting some interesting, in my view, results of different research projects, which also builds on this IT breakthroughs. And in our case, we'll learn something not from IT practices in general, but more specifically from so-called on-demand platforms that became possible due to these online new IT solutions. So what do I mean by on-demand platforms? Probably you saw them. There are all kinds of platforms. But for example, Mechanical Turk, Amazon's Mechanical Turk, won't qualify as an on-demand platform because a lot of jobs which are done there are done on kind of on the schedule of the workers at the time they find comfortable. We talk about a time-sensitive service when it has to be provided when it's requested. And of course, Uber made that model very well known and quite controversial. But my point is that actually it's been around for quite longer, much longer. The company I'm going to talk about, I've been studying for about almost 15 years. It's a group of IT people who worked for one of the first browsers, Netscape. And when it was purchased by America Online, they decided they're done with this, they want to do something different. And who remembers early 2000s might recall that at that time, a lot of call centers were moving to India because just here they were not profitable. And these people decided, well, we can create a distributed call center where agents will work from their homes and will be able to handle calls from all kinds of clients, actually purchasers of potential telemarketed products, handle those calls in English from the US. So sometimes they even match them to the client and agent location. So people speak the same accent, not my Russian accent, much more like local accents, and so, or Indian accent for that matter. And so they created this virtual call center. It's among the first companies who implemented the model we are talking about now so much, gig economy model. Although at that time I did not know the word, which would be appropriate to apply to this model. And so what can we learn from a much longer period of functioning of this company, rather than just a few years? And those are a few lessons I want to present today. So in general, when we talk about on-demand platforms, we mean this kind of aggregators of similar services, because they're aggregated from different vendors. It can be clients of taxi cabs. It can be, in my case, vendors of all kinds of products who want to outsource their sales function. These agents handle these functions from their homes. And using the IT technologies, at that time when they started, there was a telephone also necessary for these 800 numbers to call. Now you can do the whole thing on the internet. And so you aggregate these different vendors and different products, and you create more stable demand for these services. And so you can employ people who are home-based in real time more productively. And you establish kind of, I call it a login relationship, right? Officially, they're independent contractors. But in fact, even to get access to these platforms, you have to be recruited. You have some due diligence has to be done. You deal with credit cards. Who knows who you are? The company never sees you in person in most cases. They have to verify all this in order to make you a capable sales agent equipped with all the things you need to do it. And so what it includes, as you know, these days it's online profile, some recruitment effort, and I have one paper in which, with my former student, analyzing recruitment processes, we find, for example, that a lot of this recruitment, despite the virtual platform and internet recruitment, done through referrals. So personal networks play a major role. Probably you notice it, since most of you deal with recruitment processes, you probably notice a kind of similar phenomenon. Social networks, real ones, not Facebook and LinkedIn, but personal relationships don't die when we move to virtual platforms. It was one of the results of our project. Then you have to train them, but remember, because they're independent contractors, you cannot do it in a regular fashion. So what do? You do algorithmic training, right? There are some kind of applications 15 years ago quite primitive, today much more developed. Virtual training, you sign up and you do it on your own initiative, right? It has to be your initiative, under your control, in order to deal with these independent contractor problems, which I'll say a little bit more later. And then they do performance rankings, right? We know that on all these platforms, people are ranked by clients through other means, which is also an issue. Can we rank people, and can we use these HR tools to apply them to independent contractors? So a lot of issues emerge in terms of how to manage this kind of workforce. I am not going to get too much into this litigation issue. It's not my interest as a researcher, but probably you heard that 2 days ago the California Supreme Court decided now its company's actually obligation to prove that they are not using independent that they are using independent contractors, not factually employees. And by the way, my company, which I studied, was based in Silicon Valley 15 years ago. Now they moved. They never used agents in California because the labor law just wasn't, in their terms, flexible enough, right? So there is this part of the story. Now, algorithmic management, what I call here, and you see some elements of this, is an exception. It's not been tested in court whether it's appropriate to apply. It's kind of the borderline which we explore and learn from, but it gives us ideas how to manage this kind of distributed remote workforce, virtual workforce. What can be applied or not, there are these legal considerations. But from the research standpoint, what's interesting, we hear a lot about Uber, for example. It's all price mechanism. We don't need management anymore. We don't need HR tools. The price tag will take care of everything. When the demand for taxi is low, the price will go down. More people sign up. The demand will go up and find equilibrium, and drivers, the necessary number of drivers will sign up and come and serve. When the demand is high, the price will skyrocket. Many more drivers will come on a short notice, pretty much immediately, and serve these clients. Well, as we know, labor is not commodity, right? It's hard. There are all kinds of costs to this kind of matching, and this is something I want to illustrate. Essentially, we need to ask a question. Will the price mechanism on itself, without any HR management tools, work? And so what we learned from our project? There are obviously pros to this approach. It's all legal. They're independent contractors. You coordinate them through price. Why not? There is no management involved. Balanced demand and supply, at least in neoclassic kind of economics models, it should work as well. And then the key, what these companies' platforms, on-demand platforms, promote for workers, scheduling flexibility. Take work at any time you want. And then you can take, pretty much adjust your schedule to your personal situation, to your family demands, to your needs. And so you have some additional value, which is not, you're willing to pay for these on-demand calls, because you gain flexibility, you gain opportunities to handle other things as they arrive on your schedule, not on the schedule of the employer. And as we know, people are really, there are plenty of studies of time management and timing scheduling in organizations. People have problems with very strict schedules or night schedules and all these other things, which organizations don't handle very well. So it seems like here you can just let the market sort it out. But there are cons, which I already, some of them mentioned. First, human cost, what we call in the literature precariousness. Your work becomes very uncertain, your income is very uncertain, you cannot support your household like that. And then if it's price, it's kind of run to the bottom, right? We don't have any more protection of the employment, we don't have employment security. Prices might go, if there are too many taxi cab drivers, prices will go to nothing. And as we know now, very often, we get very good deal as clients, but I always wonder what taxi cab drivers earn from this. Then there's a question of quality of service. I'm based in Paris. I'm now on sabbatical at Wharton, and I take Uber from time to time. And I notice sometimes they don't know Philadelphia. They come from New Jersey, and they want to take me somewhere. First of all, they have hard time finding me around the block, right? So once I had to pretty much cancel the service because the guy was circling and could not get to me. And I just ran on my own, so had to finally pay for that. So we have quality problem with all these services. On-demand services, even the simplest ones, are not so simple, after all. We need to deal with this. So quality in the call center I studied, they quickly learned they need people to know something. There is what we call firm-specific knowledge. Even for this on-demand platform, you have to learn how the scripts work. I worked there, by the way, as an agent, sign up to experience myself, trying to sell things on this platform, to learn from the agent's experience. And sometimes, for example, they're so scripted. I was selling something, I felt I have to close the deal, but the program asked me to do upsells, to sell some kind of extra goods attached to the main product. And I did it once, some subscription to some magazine. I felt already the client was ready to wrap it up. The program doesn't let me, ask me to sell more. And as soon as I mentioned another opportunity, the client said, I'm fed up, and hung up on me, right? So it's another issue. We control sometimes with this script the agents too much and don't give them the opportunity to exercise control over their work performance, which triggers intrinsic motivation and other benefits. So there is human cost here very high, there is quality of service, and finally there is gaming. What we know, we all know the notion of price surge in Uber. But our PhD student at Wharton now studies Uber drivers' experiences. Turns out when they see a price surge, they don't rush to indicate that they're going there, right? Because they know as soon as they show up, as they're pursuing the surge, the price will go down by the time they'll make it to the area. So they secretly logged off, arrive to the destination, sit there and wait for the moment to just appear and grab the client as soon as they can. Right? So there are a lot of practices that happen which we don't know about, but that the balancing of supply and demand is not so easy. And that's the same we found at our company. They just could not manage it on a supply, demand, and price kind of principles. So what did we find instead? We found that different model, which actually raises another interesting question I want to bring up now. We talk about the kind of disappearance of the traditional employment relationship. Let's assume that these platforms will become more dominant, and actually what Peter just presented, this project work, it's kind of gig-based work within companies. So maybe companies will become also more open, flexible, recruit people. As we know, yesterday there was a conversation about blended workforce. We have permanent employees and we have some contractors, right? Maybe we'll have more and more contractors. What do we do with them? Is it all about kind of transactional approach or something more than that? And how do we manage them? In that sense, we can learn something from the evolution of the model at the call center that I talked about. And to understand this evolution, what I am kind of bringing you to is this idea of continuous employment in the gig economy. When you have people who actually stay on the platform and build some, too soon to say that it's a career, but potentially it might turn that way in more kind of knowledge-based businesses. So think about it the following way. What we do, what we kind of found in this study, that people essentially care about two things, right? How much they earn from all this experience and how variable their income is. Right? So there are these two dimensions on which we can think about employment precariousness or insecurity or whatever way you call it. And so the debate goes, if you talk to the demand platforms, they tell you, well, it's all about entrepreneurship. Our workers are flexible, you go there, you explore these options, you grab the best opportunities you can, you work wherever whenever you can, and sometimes wherever you can. So it's entrepreneurship, right? If you think about what it means, entrepreneurship, in terms of earnings, well, we know it's higher risk, higher return, right? If I take all this, go to all this trouble, taking my chances, working very flexibly, experiencing uncertainty, I want to get something in return. So in my here 2x2, so to say, we have higher risk on average and higher variance. That would be really entrepreneurial employment in a gig economy. Then there are critiques of this approach. I'm a sociologist by training, so my colleagues sociologists criticize this, say, no, it's not entrepreneurship. It's only kind of fad and corporate spin. It's precariousness. People are uncertain, people incur human costs, their families suffer, they get low income, highly variable income. What do they, these critics, what do they talk about? They talk about low income and high variance, the worst of both worlds, right? You experience this uncertainty, but you don't get anything for this. Then, in the lower left quadrant, you see this what I kind of akin to the traditional employment relationship. What does it mean to have an corporate employment relationship? You have slightly higher, quite often, than market wage, right? You paid relatively high for your job, skills, qualifications, experience, and so on. Sometimes, very often, we find like premium. And it's stable, right? Guaranteed over a long period of time, you know how much you'll be earning. So we call this secure employment. And this is what critics of this new on-demand business model claim is vanishing now. And finally, we always had, in the corporate world as well, this subsistence-like employment, where the jobs are stable, but they are very low paid. And that's why you have very high turnover. For example, call centers are traditionally like that, right? So imagine we have these four types, and in the traditional setting, we usually on the left, we have either secure employment or subsistence. On the right-hand side, this is what's emerging now. Some people claim and celebrate this on-demand model as entrepreneurial for workers, and others see it as precarious. So what is going on in this call center? So what we really see when we look at this particular company with a long record? Right? And I'll tell you a bit more now about the call center itself. It's about 20,000 people at the time when we studied, collected data. And it's about the same number of people all the time. They process, I already mentioned, calls generated by telemarketing, 800 numbers. They are based at home. Their work is scheduled in gigs. That's what's nice about this project, 30-minute shifts. You can sign up for whatever shift you want. And they pay them piece rate, essentially, fixed per minute on calls. So if you sign up for a 30-minute shift, but you get calls only for 20 minutes, you are paid for those 20 minutes, right? So your salary varies. Your wage varies from shift to shift. There is some uncertainty, potentially. And sometimes there are bonuses for completed sales on particular products. But essentially, because they sell so many different products, they decided we are not going to price on commission, so people pursue one product versus the other. They decided to price it on pretty much per minute of work. We can argue whether it's the best model. This is how it worked, and we'll see what consequences this has. So what kind of tools they came up with? Initially, they tried the pricing mechanism, and as I said, it did not work. They experienced a lot of low quality work done. People did not know how to handle calls on particular products. So they realized they need people to be there. And on a short notice, they could not provide the right work. So they started thinking how to commit people. Actually, they wanted to essentially reduce their flexibility in terms of scheduling in order to have for themselves, for the platform, some predictability. Will they have enough people at the right time, of the right quality people, who are prepared to take these calls? So they started forecasting. It's a traditional system for call centers, of course, to forecast the demand. They needed some historical record from different vendors. It's very varied kind of service products they sold. They targeted utilization rate 50%. So they wanted, on average, 50% of the time, their agents to take calls, right? It's not high, because for traditional call centers, those who work with them, it's 90% usually they want to have a utilization rate, because they pay for the whole hour. Here they pay only for the time on calls. The question, what does it give to workers, is important. We'll talk about it as well. And then their management innovation was this commitment system. Essentially, they realized they have to ask agents to commit to calls. And in exchange for their commitment, they would give them a priority on receiving calls. Right? So that was a deal, which is actually not a traditional price coordination mechanism. We call it dynamic commitment, where you still want people to build kind of long-term mutual obligations. You tell us when you'll come to work, we'll give you more calls to have a higher pay. So that was exactly the key of this innovation. It was very short-term, 10 days in advance. For the next week, you had to announce when you're going to work, announce your schedule. But that made a big difference. For the company, at the end of the day, they got high quality workers. And for the people who started earning more stable and at least the core of this employment force, I'll show you some results, they were earning more stable income and higher income. By the way, their incomes are not so high here, but it's $12, $15 an hour. In remote areas of the US, it was significant, for this call center work, it's not a bad income, right? So they became very competitive. But essentially, this dynamic commitment is a deviation from a price model, price coordination mechanism, and it's an invention, I would say, for this kind of on-demand work, on-demand platforms. And what we noticed, actually, what the question we asked in this study, do workers really trade their flexibility for security? What kind of employment characterized by those 4 types I told you before, they get as a result of this trade-off? So what did we find? We did this empirical analysis of a detailed record of 11,000 plus of these agents over a 30-week period. We identified 4 employment patterns: stable schedules with some fluctuation. What's nice about this flexibility, you can have your stable schedule, but then deviate as your immediate circumstances require. Family emergency, some other obligations, and so on. We found actually quite common schedules. We found a day schedule. There are a lot of people who want to work 9 to 5. Why? Because a lot of these workers, agents, are women with young children. They like this work from home, but their schedules are built into the schedules of their family, their spouses, and so on. So they need to be free in the evenings, right, to deal with their children, their spouses. But we did find as well evening schedules, weekend schedules, and random schedules. So there are people who work ad hoc, here and there. And to jump ahead a little bit, this random group, it's important, right? Because if you want to have the core people who handle more continuous schedules, some people have to take this kind of overflow of calls and so on. So we have 4 schedules, right? Not only random. And by the way, recently there was a paper published about Uber, analyzing the schedules of Uber drivers. There, do you have any guesses which schedule is absent from Uber drivers' patterns among these 4? Day. Day schedule is not there, right? So most weekend exist. So most of these Uber drivers actually don't work during the day, which indicates it's not the main job for any of them, So here we found all 4 schedules. And then the question is how these schedules map into the employment patterns which I described. Remember I told you that the debate in the literature now and in the practice of these on-demand platforms is whether it's entrepreneurial or precarious employment. On the right-hand side, for some reason my labels for the types of employment didn't appear here, but I hope you remember. The red one is precarious, the green one is entrepreneurial. We don't have any types there. In fact, the debate is misguided. We don't have either entrepreneurship or precariousness if you take my definitions of these terms, and we need to be more precise what we mean. We do find, since we found the day schedule, we compare it all the other schedules vis-a-vis the day, because day is this conventional employment pattern, right? What's important first, as I said, that it exists in this call center. People want to work 9 to 5, and for many people it makes perfect sense. They want to have the schedules. It's the first finding. But the other 3 schedules actually are organized differently. We get weekend where you have much more income and low variance. So vis-a-vis the day schedule, you gain more security working on weekends, because this is when the core traffic of sales requests come, right? Potential clients, they are free on weekends, they watch infomercials, they buy these products. The other 2, random actually is not either, as I said, entrepreneurial or precarious, it's actually subsistence-like employment. It's small income, quite stable. Right? People get it, students, as a little extra cash, and for all other reasons. And finally, evening schedule is actually is lower on rewards. Evening includes late night as well, right? Until midnight and sometimes 2 a.m. So low on rewards, but doesn't change vis-a-vis day in terms of variance. So it's also more moving into kind of this subsistence direction rather than precariousness, or somewhere in between. So the conclusion I wanted to take from this is that we find in these on-demand platforms interest among workers, the interest in stable schedules. Day schedule is quite popular. And the discussion which goes around should not be about precariousness or entrepreneurship. We should look at all these 4 possible types and think how to provide this longer-term employment relationship, and maybe in the future some careers, built from gigs as kind of building blocks. If it's true that the economy is moving more and more in that direction, and for some industries it might be the case, we need to think about still relationships with employees or workers or independent contractors, whatever way we'll call them. These legal issues still have to be reviewed and developed. We need to think about this in more longer term and let people build their careers. So again, to kind of lead us to some conclusions, the gig economy offers some scheduling flexibility, but it's not about precariousness and entrepreneurship. There are some new HR tools that emerge in this domain and might be useful for us to think about as we want to make our workforce more flexible in organizations. And we need to rethink what employment relationship means and how it can be provided in this more dynamic, more uncertain environment for both companies and employees. Thank you.